Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast. Dave is with me today, and we also have a couple of other guests, Ross Chapman and Ryan Tafilowski, who we just learned will be exclusively referring to as the talent on today's podcast, are joining us today. And so I'm going to, Dave's a regular guest. So Dave, yes. Hey, so glad you're here.
Great to see you, Autumn. Can't wait for today.
Yes, I'm excited about our conversation today. And Ross and Ryan, I'm going to ask you two to just introduce yourselves, share a little bit about your life, and help our listeners get to know you.
Okay, my name's Ryan Tafilowski. It's really good to be here. I do a couple things. I used to be on staff at the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, which is how I know Ross, my co-talent. And
together you make talent.
That's right. Together we make one talent. Is there a parable about that?
There is.
Okay, so I do a couple things. I teach theology at Denver Seminary. And then I also pastor a congregation in Littleton called Foothills Fellowship. And fun fact, it sometimes gets confused with Fellowship Denver. And so people will say, oh, I know a ton of people there. And I said, really? Because there aren't a ton of people there. Or they'll say, oh, I know the pastor there. And I'll say, well, not as well as you think you do. So I work in pastoral ministry. I've been serving at this church in one capacity or another for many years now, almost 20 years. And then, alongside the work I do at the seminary. And I'm married to Adrian, who is amazing. She leads a nonprofit here in the city called the Mile High Workshop, which does workforce development for folks coming out of incarceration or homelessness or addiction. So she does amazing work. And then we're parents to two kids, Kit and Sam, 6 and 4, who are unrelenting cyclones of destruction and also wonderful.
That's great, Ryan. I'm Ross. I serve as the CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. Been in that role for 3 years. Moved here from Indiana to be a part of the Denver Institute team. And fun fact is that Ryan was in my interview process as part of the staff. And that's where we met for the first time. And then immediately after that, he retired from Denver Institute for Faith and Work as the theologian in residence, mostly coinciding with his new gig, full-time gig, I think, at Denver Seminary. So,
as opposed to coinciding with you coming?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I hope so.
So that's what he told you?
That's what he told me. Huh. Yeah.
I can see how that looked personal.
Yeah, it really felt pretty horrible. But
we're talking about work, tough.
It's
reality in the workplace.
Exactly. We're talking about the workplace. We did manage to put our names on a book together, which we can tell you that story a little bit later. But I'm married to Candace. She is in economic and community development, and we have a passion for the cities that we've lived in and the place that we are. And we think that's really important. And we are raising 3 boys who are 6th, 4th, and 2nd grade. So we just became middle school parents. Mm-hmm. It's a whole new world for us. We're really loving Colorado and love being in Denver. It's just been awesome. And the team at Denver Institute is so fun, and lots of great connections here with fellowship, and it's been really cool to see all that.
Yeah, Fellowship Denver has been connected to Denver Institute for Faith and Work for many years now, and known several of the staff there. We've had many people from Fellowship go through various programs that Denver Institute has provided, and so we have appreciated the good work that Denver Institute for Faith and Work is doing in the city for many, many years now. And it's wonderful to have you both on the podcast today. We specifically asked you to come on to talk about a book. You referenced this, Ross, a moment ago. You said you both managed to put your names together on a book.
Yes.
I think that means that you probably wrote it, but you made it sound as if that was in question.
We're going to unpack the real truth right now. We're going to get to the bottom of this. It's actually a pretty funny story. Ryan, you can chime in and you can tell me if you think it's funny. But in the very first conversation I had after being told that I was going to be the CEO at Denver Institute, I talked to our VP of Ops, Abby Warland, and she said, hey, I was really just trying to get to know the staff. I was still in Indiana. I wasn't even officially working for Denver Institute, just trying to get to know everyone. And she's like, hey, just here as we wrap up, I'd love to tell you some good news about a couple book proposals that we have with InterVarsity. It's very exciting. So Joanna Meyer has one. It's called Women Work and Calling, and they're going to do it. And then we have this other book that we submitted. And it was more like a collection of things that we just gathered around the Google Drive. And they would love to publish it. And I was like, well, that's amazing news. And she goes, except they want your name to be on it. And I was like, no, absolutely not. We're not doing that. That doesn't make any sense. I have nothing to do with the book, in fact. And they're like, well, you're going to be the new person. I think they'd really like for you to consider it. Maybe you could like look at it and contribute or edit. And I was like, maybe I could be an editor. So anyways, I was wrapping up my dissertation at the time as well, and moving to Denver and doing this new job, and then supposed to be like editing this book. So I really tried to get to the bottom of like who's contributed the content to this book. And there was consensus on the team that there were a lot of different like potential people who've added things, but it's been adapted many times and now edited. But everybody agreed Ryan Tafilowski was like a key contributor.
He was the talent, you might say.
He was the talent in the book. So I spent a lot of time trying to get it from like a lot of short things to sort of some like real chapters with a real kind of flow and theme to it all. And then I ended up writing the introduction and the chapter on rest so that I could feel decent about having my name on this book. So it's, and then one of the funny things about this is also one of my mentors got this book in the mail and I'd sent it to him. He's like, hey man, I got your thing you sent me today. And I was like, what do you mean the thing I sent you? He goes, well, I was expecting a book, but it is a pamphlet, I think. I just loved that reaction. And I was like, well, that was pretty intentional. We wanted people to be able to engage it. And it's not supposed to be like the fullest thing you could ever read about God's vision for work or a theology for work, but it's to get people started. So that's kind of the backstory of the book. And I think Ryan and I have gotten to a place of comfortability now with our name being on the book. We're excited about what it says and how people might engage it.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, the book is a product of Denver Institute for Faith and Work. I mean, many people worked on it, and it's one of the most talented groups of people I've ever been around. Really amazing team, really thoughtful people. And so, yeah, I mean, Abby and Pamela and Brian Gray and Jeff Hannon all contributed. And it turns out when you send a book to a publisher and they're like, who's the author? You can't just be like, just like a bunch of people, we're not really sure. You can't put that on the front of a book. So I wrote a lot of it. Ross wrote a lot of it, but the team also really contributed. And what's amazing about the book is if you want to know sort of the vision for work that Denver Institute for Faith and Work is all about, it's a really good primer because it lays out this vision that God gives us for work. Now, it's not the last word. It's not comprehensive. It's intended to be accessible, but it's really intended for Christians to start thinking about what God might require of them in their work. And so it's just a joy to get to collaborate on it. And Ross's name, I will note, goes first on the book. But
that was the first thing I noticed.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Well, when the kingdom comes.
More bold.
I think probably my name will be first.
Let's just be clear. I had to beg Ryan a little bit to make this work out. But yeah, I really like the title of the book because I think that's what we would want people to think about when they go into their workplace. What does it mean to do faithful work? And we would say, you're in the daily grind, in all of the responsibilities and duties and annoyances and frustrations of work. You're doing it with God, not for Him. And you're doing it actually for others to experience more of, hopefully, life as He intended, a little bit of His love, a little bit of His grace. And yeah, so I really like where the title landed. It's fun, and it is a short read. It's a small book. And it's meant to just get people thinking.
Yeah, it's nice to have the thesis of the book right on the front cover.
In the title.
Faithful work in the daily grind with God and for others. Okay, now you're going to tell me about it. That's great.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned this sort of a moment ago, but for the sake of clarity, like who is this book for?
Yeah. Well, I would say it's for anyone who is following Jesus and has started to recognize I have some questions about how I do that at work. Or, sometimes we might think work is really about supporting the real stuff that counts in kind of God's mind or the church's mind. So it's really for people who are following Jesus to have an opportunity to go, okay, what are the key questions I could be asking? What are maybe some parts of Scripture I haven't considered that might bring more light to how I'm showing up at work and the way I go about that with my coworkers or customers? And so it's intended for your average Christian who's just wondering, how do I connect the dots here between this thing I spend 2,000 hours a year doing, and I would also add not just your paid work. I don't think we wrote the book explicitly thinking of like unpaid work, but it should be noted that we're doing work all the time. Some of it we get paid for, and some of it we don't. And the work at Denver Institute for Faith and Work is more focused on what you're getting paid to do, but not exclusively, because you spend so much of your time there. If you're following Jesus and you said you want him to be the Lord of your life, he's Lord over your work life. What does that then mean? How do I connect those dots? How do I make him the Lord of my work life?
That is one, I want to pull out one aspect of what you just said that I have appreciated in so many conversations with various people from the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, and that is that in this conversation about work, there's space for all kinds of work. So the ideas presented in the book and in other materials and in other ways that we engage with the content that the Denver Institute is putting out. I hear this over and over, and I think it's so helpful. In my conversations with Joanna, she emphasizes that women's work, for instance, a lot of the way women experience work is unpaid and unique to their season of life, to their particular circumstance, to the makeup of their family, whether they're single or married. And then also that people who may be listening, like retirees, very much engage in work. But and so the conversation is big enough to include all of those people. Before we talk a little bit more about the book, I have a question for both of you. I would love to know, how has your own experience of work shaped the way you think about vocation and work? You both spend time thinking about a theology of work, encouraging people in their work, encouraging them to work in a way that integrates this theology. And so how has this kind of process occurred in your own life and work?
A couple things I would share here out of my own experience. Well, I'll put it this way. So some years ago, I guess it would have been about 2008, I went away to school in the United Kingdom. I did a master's degree at this prestigious divinity school, and I thought that was pretty good, and that I was really impressive. And then when I finished, I was applying for jobs. And I don't know if you know how much a master's degree from a fancy divinity school in Europe is worth, but it's worth about negative $40,000. So I was applying for jobs at churches and in sort of think tanks maybe, and I just couldn't find anything at all. So like any self-respecting evangelical, I worked as a barista for a time. And so
Me too.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, oh, man. Unless I worked at Starbucks, really hated it. That's not for me. And I'm grateful not to do it anymore. But as I look back on it, I'm actually really embarrassed about my witness there. And part of the reason, I think, is I had a really poor theology of work. I had this assumption that because I wasn't doing what I quote unquote had been made to do, I wasn't pursuing my vocation, that this didn't really matter. I was just killing time until I was doing something that actually mattered. Number one, that's a really terrible understanding of vocation. There's some discussion of that in the book. Denver Institute does amazing work about expanding our vision for vocation, right? In our cultural lexicon, vocation has basically been equated with paid employment. But that's not a very helpful definition, because some of the things that God is calling us to do that matter the most might be unpaid, as you said, Autumn, or Like caring for children would be a really good example, or also being called into union and communion with Jesus Christ, which is every Christian's ultimate vocation. So because I thought, well, I want to be a pastor or I want to be a theologian, this doesn't matter. Well, I wasted a lot of time there that could have been redemptive because I had this really bad understanding of work. And so that helps to inform the way that I think about a theology of work now. Now, I don't think work is the most important thing about a human being, but it is what we spend most of our time doing. And if discipleship to Jesus doesn't touch that and bring it into under his lordship, as Ross just said, we are wasting a tremendous opportunity to bear witness to Jesus and to love our neighbors in the workplace. And part of it was born of my experience as a pastor, where I came to see that this is a live question for people, that people really wrestle with this. I spend most of my hours doing this. Does it matter to God? And if it does, how? And what about if I'm in a job that doesn't fulfill me very much? So these are the questions that were sort of bubbling up, and we were able to begin to address, I think, in Faithful Work.
I really like your work story. I think I could tell them now. They're so good. I would say for me, I also went to seminary thinking that I would be a pastor. But I was pretty open to like what that could look like. I wasn't really sure. And I had noticed in seminary, some of my friends who had started in the workforce started sort of feeling like they needed to potentially consider going to seminary and being a church person, because they recognize like, hey, if I really want to sort of give my life to Jesus, it seems like I need to go work for a church or a nonprofit maybe, or do something more than what I'm studying here for like the Series 7, financial wealth management role. Or I would watch my dad's journey in work and his, like, I don't know, every decade, just like, should I be working in the church instead of here? And so early on, I left seminary. I didn't get to go work for a church. I worked for a nonprofit. It was started by a group of churches in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we were mostly just talking to people in their 20s. So young professionals. And one of the key conversations that we recognized we needed to have was about work. So we talked about relationships and church and who is Jesus and all of those kinds of things. But then, like, a lot of people moved to Charlotte for their job. It's the second largest banking city in the country. And so I just started studying it more and started going, all right, what would we say about work if we were going to say anything about work? And I realized I started to connect those dots between, my friend who was like, hey, I'm thinking about seminary instead of doing wealth management. What seminaries do you think I should look at? And I said, you shouldn't look at any seminaries. Like, who's going to be the Christian wealth manager if you're not going to be that? Don't we actually have you strategically positioned? We meaning like the church and God, have you like in this great role where like you uniquely can serve in a way that I never could. Like, you've been trained, you've got these relationships. Actually, if you dive into your opportunities, like, people talk about the most difficult and most exciting things in their life to their wealth managers, because they usually have some big impact on how they're planning for, where they use their money. Like, they're not talking to their pastor about their estate planning.
Definitely
and
not.
and their generosity. And
I've been trying to get people to do that.
yeah, or how they're going to fund, things in the future for their kids, or you have an opportunity to like ask them really important questions at these moments when they're being really honest, vulnerable, open with you. Like, yeah, we need a Christian there. Or just to think about, man, okay, if that's true for my friends and my dad or whatever, then like we really have an incredible opportunity as the church at work that I don't really think we're talking about much. So that kind of led me into that kind of work. And then quick story is I moved back to Indiana after Charlotte to help churches work together for the good of the city. I had a local business owner who funded that idea. He asked me to consider doing that. And okay, so there was no job description, no organization. And a couple of years in, we were convening 50 to 60 church leaders every quarter from all over the city, talking about being the one church of our city. What does that mean? what are the needs of the city, and then we would convene nonprofit leaders and have the same conversation with them, 50 to 60 of them. And I just realized a few years in, like, the needs of our city are tremendous. And I think nonprofits and churches are basically doing the right things, but actually only mobilizing spare time and spare funding. And so I just thought, wow, like, I've met all these different leaders who are trying to follow Jesus in their industry or their government role or their nonprofit role or their church role, maybe in education or arts even. It's like, how do all those roles, if people are following Jesus in all those places, actually contribute to addressing some of the big needs of our city that we know God cares about, like kids in foster care, or that people don't have a place to live, or good work, or everyone seems to be living paycheck to paycheck. What could we do about that? So some of these biggest kind of issues of the city, I just got really wholly discontent, you could say, about what I was doing. And I was like, I gotta dive into this conversation. When I talk to somebody who's leading a bank or playing some big role in our city, and they happen to be following Jesus as well, how do I cultivate an imagination in them for how they're participating in these questions, rather than just saying, hey, hopefully you could fund some of this work. I think there's a lot more imagination there. So that got me into this whole thing. So
One of the big ideas in your book that I really like, and I've spent some time just kind of thinking about it, was a challenge to see your vocation as the primary or as a major way in which you love your neighbor. So vocation as expressing love of neighbor. Such an interesting framework because, like you said earlier, I do think if anyone does have some vision of work from a Christian perspective, it is, and we've talked about this. In fact, Autumn, I was just thinking about it. Last time we talked about work on the podcast, you and I, we talked some about Ecclesiastes, and one of the big sort of upshots of Ecclesiastes is that actually work does matter. Sort of whatever your hand finds to do it for God's glory, do it for God. And that sort of is a repeated idea in the New Testament, especially for those who are slaves and servants. And does my work matter? And no, whatever your hand finds to do it, you do it for the glory of Jesus. And so if there is a framework for where my work fits in the grand scheme of things, okay, it's for God's glory, and that's true and good. But what you're saying is kind of a yes and that work also is a vastly underappreciated way in which we love our neighbor. So I wonder if you can unpack that more, because it is I think for a lot of our listeners will be a huge challenge. Like how does my actual work love my neighbor?
Ryan, do you want to start with that?
I would love to. So let's talk about theology.
Okay.
Theology
Okay.
is
Let's do it.
the best.
From the theology professor.
Yeah. So I think the story starts here for me anyway, in the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. There's many reasons that I really like being a Protestant, but I think that the Protestant church's greatest gift, or perhaps its greatest gift to the church, is the recovery of this doctrine called the priesthood of all believers. And what the reformers, Martin Luther primarily, were pushing against was this idea that there was sacred work that really matters to God. That would be like you're a priest, you administer the sacraments. And then there's work that doesn't matter really in any ultimate theological sense. You might have to do it to make ends meet. That's how most people in the 16th century would have been living and working. But one of Luther's, I think, most brilliant insights, and I think he's reading the New Testament here rightly, that God's vision for God's people is that we are a priestly people. And that's not a novel idea. I mean, you get this in Exodus 19 and 20, and then you get Peter picking up on this in 1 Peter. But what does a priest do? Well, most fundamentally, a priest reflects God's life to creation and reflects creation's life to God. Right? And Luther says, well, man, maybe one of the main ways we do this is through our daily work. And so he's got these amazing writings where he says, if you're a baker, you might not actually think of your work as being sacred. But what could be more sacred than nourishing and sustaining life? Actually, God is using that baker to sustain the lives of people around them. And this can be an immensely powerful idea if we unlock it, that actually this work is one of the ways that we exercise the priesthood of our calling, the priesthood of all believers. And my kids are out of diapers now, but it's not in the distant past that I changed thousands and thousands of diapers. I don't even know how it's possible looking back, that there's that many diapers. And, I have one child who was up often in the night. And so I would think, man, you're groggy, you're bleary-eyed, attending to a child in the night or changing another diaper. And it can be hard to see. There's nothing glamorous about that. It can be hard to see any beauty in that moment. But if you recover that vision of the priesthood of all believers, it really is the case that actually God is sustaining my child's life through my work, right? Through changing diapers and attending to them in the night. And it's a very, very powerful idea, and I think singular idea to the Christian faith, that God is actually providing for the needs of our neighbor. And the way he does that is not in the abstract. The way he does it is very concretely through your work. And so I think this is what the Christian faith has to offer in thinking about work is in our cultural moment. I'll stop talking here in a second. In our cultural moment, work has become self-referential. It's a way of becoming self-actualized. The journalist Derek Thompson calls it workism. We use work to justify our identities and to find transcendence. I think that's the wrong idea altogether. I actually think work is primarily about your neighbor. And if you find it fulfilling, that's amazing. But even if you don't, it remains true that actually God might be sustaining the world through your work.
Mm-hmm.
So well said, Ryan. Also, didn't Martin Luther say God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does?
That's right. And he said the last thing the world needs is another pastor, with apologies.
That's so good.
But I was thinking of that when you were speaking, Ross, that actually, do we need more people going to seminary? Yes. I teach at one. That would be great.
Yes, we do. Yep.
But we need Christian wealth managers, and actually we don't need another pastor there. That's right.
Yeah, and if the seminary students catch a vision for the wealth manager's work,
that's right.
Super powerful. Because what you said, and we would say another way, is that society has a really poor view of work. And maybe, as Ryan said, maybe other religions don't have a great view of work, but we should have the best view of work. It should be really compelling to a watching world to note, well, why are Christians showing up differently in work? Well, one reason is they recognize that it's a way they're loving their neighbor. Another reason is it's worship. They do it for the glory of God. I think a third one is also, it's a powerful way that God is shaping them to be more like Jesus. This is where we are faced with tough challenges, tough people, and he's using that to shape us every day through our every single day decisions to be more like him, if we notice it.
You also point out in the book that our perspective on work, and which impacts the way we go about our work, is connected to, sort of flows out of, our view of the gospel. I want to read one quote from the book, and I don't actually know who to attribute this quote to. It might be Ryan. It might be Abby Warland. It might be, pick your favorite Denver Institute staff member. But the quote says, "The way we think about work is tied to the way we think about the gospel. If our understanding of the gospel is too narrow, we will arrive at an instrumental understanding of our work, meaning that work is good only because of the value it can create for something else. But if we allow Scripture to expand our understanding, we can include an intrinsic view of our work, meaning work itself is valuable." So talk me through, how does a too small gospel produce this view of work, an instrumental view of work? Ross, here, I'll pitch this to you.
Okay, good. Then we can have the theologian correct me.
Okay, sounds great. Ryan will get the
awesome.
second word on this one.
Yeah, I would say the instrumental view of work could also show up as work is only valuable if I can share my faith with somebody and somebody decides they want to follow Jesus too. Or if I make enough money that I can really fund the stuff that God cares about. That would be like an instrumental view that I think is rooted in a 2-chapter story of the gospel, which is that humanity is bad and rebelled and is so bad that the only thing that really matters is if they get saved by Jesus, so that they can go to heaven, because everything else is bad. And so if you're living with that as sort of underneath everything that you're thinking about when you think of the good news, like Jesus died for my sins so I can go to heaven, then it's gonna be harder to have any kind of imagination for work beyond instrumental, because then it's like the only thing that really matters is their eternal destination. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not doing something in my workplace that contributes to that possibility for them, then it's not valuable.
Yeah, I mean, that truncated gospel that Ross just described, that 2-chapter, one of the problems with it, and there are many, I think, but one of the problems is it doesn't leave Christians much to do in the meantime, right? So we're fallen, we put our faith in Jesus, we await his return. Those are all good ideas, Orthodox Christian ideas. But the question now becomes like, well, what do I do now? And if your gospel is very short that way, and it doesn't have a really expansive understanding of Christ's redemption, and it doesn't have a compelling vision for the future of creation, then there really is no avenue for you to think of your work as somehow sort of participating in God's redemption. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really helpful. And I will offer this next comment with great fear and trembling, because I'm in the presence of a New Testament scholar who studies Luke to make matters worse, because I'm thinking of the way that the Gospel of Luke thinks about the gospel. Mm-hmm. Right? This word gospel, euangelion, in Greek, it does not mean Jesus died on the cross, and if you confess faith in him, you get to go to heaven. That's an implication of the euangelion. But that's a political word. That's an announcement word that someone is in charge now, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the Evangelion of Caesar, where he says, listen up, everyone. I'm in charge. I'm the one who's reigning. And the claim in the New Testament is that actually, no, the good news of Jesus Christ is that he is reigning. And if he is reigning, then that means every aspect of human life is under his dominion, mm-hmm. and ought to change now. And so that's another way that we might think about of the gospel as very, very big. What does it mean to undertake our work in a world where there has been a decree that Jesus Christ is now in charge? And so if you're just thinking about it on that very small scale, and also I would add on a very individualistic scale, that the gospel is about me and Jesus, mm-hmm. Then you're going to leave a great deal of life, not least your work, outside of Christ's dominion.
Well, since you mentioned Luke,
he's just waiting over there.
I feel like now I have permission to unpack a little bit more, not to disagree, but to put some emphasis and maybe disagree a little.
Great. Dave doesn't think your work matters to God.
Okay.
No, it does. It does matter.
The gospel is you and Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
That is. When Jesus quotes from Isaiah and incorporates the term euangelion, it is this Jewish hope, mm-hmm. that the Messiah would bring freedom to the slaves and those who are captive, and this idea of the year of Jubilee, mm-hmm. A kind of freedom that does incorporate, I would say, individual spiritual components. We have 4 gospels, not just one, in terms of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Other gospels unpack a little bit more the individualistic components and personal components of salvation that are important. Yet Luke, even his definition of salvation, always has a component of social, corporate elements to it. So that then includes work and what it is that you do and how that impacts other people. So I do think that is a helpful way to incorporate sort of Lucan theology into this discussion.
Well, and to piggyback, I mean, you get this vision in Isaiah, but also in the other prophets, that one of the ways you will know that God's reign has come is that people can work in safety and security, and they will enjoy the fruit of their labor. They will get to plant vineyards and drink the wine, and they will get to plant crops and reap them. That's part of God's vision for shalom. And so if we think of that as an angle into thinking about work, how do we create better ways of working, better systems of working, better companies? How do we make incremental improvements to our economies where people actually enjoy the fruit of their labor, where they actually get to see the result of their work, where there is deep satisfaction? Now, the world is deeply twisted and contorted by sin. That's not an easy nut to crack. But I think that is part of the vision, because when God reigns, human work flourishes.
In view of this kind of expansive view of the gospel, or with this in mind, I want to ask a bigger question, but first, both of you use this term chapters. So fill us in on that. If someone's listening and it's like, Ross said it, then Ryan said it, what do these chapters mean?
Speaking as the non-theologian, it's just become a normal thing when you're reading biblical commentary to sort of tell the entire story of Scripture in 4 chapters. Mm-hmm. So Genesis to Revelation in 4 chapters. You guys correct me if you want to say it differently. But so the first one being creation, which is kind of Genesis 1-2. And then chapter 2 would be the fall, which has pervasive effects on everything, not just our broken relationship with God. But one of the cool things in the book that I came across when I read some of the work Denver Institute put into this was, what are all the things that are broken as a result of humanity kind of doing their own thing? And one of them, so usually I think of 4 of those, and this is getting into the weeds on the fall, but there's a 5th one. I think we should come back to that probably. Mm-hmm. But then chapter 3 would be, how is God redeeming and putting things back right, which actually begins also in Genesis 3 and goes all the way up to the end of Revelation, which is chapter 4, which is the new heavens and the new earth that is coming down, and heaven and earth are coming together, Ephesians 1:10, under Christ. And so that's the 4 chapters. And so we usually, at least I grew up, I would say I was taught chapter 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. It's not like I didn't know the creation story and I didn't know there was an ending, but they seemed sort of like, well, let's get on with the real stuff, which is, wow, we rebelled against God and we need a solution for that. Mostly individual. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's kind of the evangelical world I grew up in. Mm-hmm. So the 2 ends of the story are chapter 1 and chapter 4. They're the bookends. And I think they bring a lot of grounding and hope to the whole story.
Mm-hmm. So with those in view, then thanks for that explanation, Ross. If we keep that in mind, that the gospel, as we just referenced, includes we believe a big enough gospel to include all of this and to give us this kind of vision that is possible through the gospel that we've been given. But in our day-to-day work and in the conversations that I know we all hear with the various people, so in our churches, with your students, Ryan, with the people you work with, Ross, I know one of the biggest wrestling points that people have in their work is this question of meaning and the feeling that my work is tedious or my work is unimportant. And when I say this question of meaning, they're asking, my work doesn't really seem meaningful to me. Is it meaningful to anyone else? I'm not sure. And so with these chapters in view, they're sort of feeling the effects of chapter 2, of the fall, of the brokenness of work and the way that work exists in our particular place and time. And they may not see the impact of their work. They may not see the importance of it. So how do you encourage someone who that's their reality in their work? What would you say to someone who feels stuck, like in a job that doesn't seem meaningful, or is maybe even actually dysfunctional, or has some very real like ethical complexity that they're wrestling with?
I'm deferring to Ryan, who just wrote a book on the fall and work, so we're going to let him kick it off, and then I can help clean up.
Okay. There's a lot to say here. A few things I have found help. Pastorally, first off, I worry sometimes that we are asking work to do too much for us, that we're putting it at the center of our personhood. And of course, we all know this kind of intuitively, right? The first time you ever meet a new person, the first or second question is, what do you do? I think actually it might be helpful to think of some other questions we might ask someone when we first meet them that kind of decenters work from our personhood, because I think this can be really problematic, especially when people are in work that they don't find especially fulfilling, right? So it's not the most important thing about what it means to be a person. I think that takes some of the pressure off. I think I have found, working especially with students, early career folks especially, there's this enormous cultural pressure to find something that you're passionate about. And not only that, I mean, I think especially with sort of Gen Z and younger, there's a lot of pressure too, that also your work has to be perfectly ethical. It has to reflect your values. And if it's not doing that, then you need to find a different job. One of the things I would say, and I don't know what Ross would say about this, I think sin has distorted work to such a degree that actually I'm not sure there is any work that is perfectly ethical. I'm not sure as finite creatures we have any option but to work inside systems that are broken, perhaps irretrievably. Now, I think the gospel can redeem any work, nearly any work, at least in part. But for example, I have a friend who's a kind of mid-level executive at a big tech company. And I think he feels a real ambivalence about his work because they're doing some amazing stuff. And they're also doing some stuff that is above his pay grade, beyond his control, that I think is actually potentially quite destructive. So how do I think about this? Well, I think God knows that we are flesh, that we are earthlings. We're not God. And I think the Bible actually has more than one theology of work. And the creation theology is really good, really helpful. But it's also worth recovering a vision like you get in Ecclesiastes, which already came up, which is work is really good. It is worth doing. But sometimes it is absurd. Sometimes you try with all your might to do something and the project falls through. And probably you've had this experience where you work, and then your boss goes, I don't think so. Or we're going to go in a different direction. Or Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, you might work and then everything you work for is going to fall into the hands of the next generation and they might be totally incompetent and it's going to come to nothing. But what's interesting is Solomon doesn't say, well, don't try then. He says, no, do it with all your might. I think there's a lot of power in a very earthy theology of work like that. That actually, it might not work out. But it is what God has given you to do. And it is worth doing, right? It's worth doing with all your might. And it's a good gift that sometimes is frustrating or futile. And at the end of the book, in chapter 12, he says, the day is going to come when you're not going to be able to do it, and you're going to wish that you had done it with all your strength. So we talk in the book about how work has this intrinsic value.
Yes. Yeah.
And I also think work has an instrumental value. It is okay to do what you need to do to provide for your family and for your neighbor, even if it's not mind-blowingly meaningful.
Some of the instructions we get from Paul to churches are very underwhelming when you read it initially.
Totally. That's right.
Live a quiet life, work with your hands, earn a living, be a kind of industrious worker that you can take care of not just your own family, but others who might be in need. And that's kind of the vision. He doesn't talk about the kind of work.
And he holds himself up as an example of one who does this, right? He says, when I was with you, he's speaking to the Thessalonians, I worked with my hands. So this is the Apostle Paul speaking. Sometimes you just need to make tents.
Or tables.
Or
whatever Jesus was making for 20 years.
That's right.
Right?
I would say that's one of the, I love what Ryan said about it. I also think we could just look at Jesus. Here's the Son of God who made everything and could do anything. And he decides to take an obscure job in the middle of nowhere, just among a group of people doing a regular job. of course, Scripture doesn't tell us what that was like and doesn't tell us exactly the work he did, but, we get one little word to describe it. But, man, like, we should reflect on that. We should spend some time thinking about that. The creator of the world decided, a large portion of the time he was going to spend here in human flesh and dwelling among us was actually just dwelling among us in obscurity, unknown. Of course he knew Torah and he was about his father's business at 12 in the temple, and his parents should have known that, but he was also working alongside his dad or wherever that story went, just doing human work. And I think the tediousness of a job or the search for meaning is an important thing, and there's places we can go in Scripture that help us express the frustration of work. And I think those are worth spending time in meditation on, because God knows what that's like. He knows the toilsome nature of work. When you cut your piece of wood too short, because your tape measure was broken. Okay, maybe something like that was actually experienced by Jesus. Just the brokenness of it. So I think that's huge. And I also think Ryan had an incredible point that I wanted to go back to, which was we're asking work to do too much in our current society. Like, historically speaking, we are in a privileged time when it comes to work. Like, many of us actually get to ask what kind of work we want to do.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not been the case in world history, generally speaking. And we talked about how society thinks we should have like passion and meaning, and we should go find our calling and who we are in our work. And like, that is the most unbiblical way to think about work you could come up with. Work is actually just a place we go express who we are already, because we are called to union and communion. And then we get to express that through whatever the job is. And so I would say if you're searching for that, or it just feels meaningless, remember that, one, like, God has you there for now. Don't have to stay forever necessarily. May not be the best use of your skills. It's an opportunity for worship. Colossians 3:23, right? Do it for the Lord. You're working for Him. You're not working for someone else. You can frame it that way, and you can also see it as a way that God is shaping you. What is more meaningful than that? Worship and your own discipleship journey into being more and more like Jesus. And all the instrumental other things like funding that you need to live, providing for your family, opportunities to be in relationship with others. Those are all really important things, core to what it means to be human and to express what it means to be in union and communion with God as well.
I think that actually doing what Colossians 3 encourages us to do becomes easier if we do believe that work has an intrinsic value. That work itself is something that we, as you've said earlier in the podcast, get to do with God. It follows from this pattern of chapter 1 of the story, which is creation, the good creative work that God did and invited us into. And that, in my own life and story, the intrinsic value of work and this idea that work is worth doing because it is a gift, because it is in itself a way that God forms us and shapes us, allows us to participate with Him in bringing good to others, in loving our neighbor. I grew up in a rural agricultural setting. I did farm work for most of my life, and I picked up from farmers and ranchers who I worked alongside this idea. I didn't know at the time that that's what I was imbibing from them, but that the work itself was good, that there's no shortage of, when you work on a farm or you're a rancher, of endless toil. And there's no shortage of joking about the tediousness of that and the difficulty and the way you're reliant on the weather and so many other factors outside of your control. But what I learned through that was that work is life and life is work, and it's a good thing God has given us to do, and that rest is restful after you've worked really hard. Those were all things that I learned like in my childhood doing that kind of work. And so then when I entered knowledge work and there was all this discussion about like work and life balance, it was very confusing to me. I didn't even like that as a concept was so outside of the way I had experienced work that it took me a while to start to understand what people were talking about when they were having these discussions and when they were concerned about the fact that they were working too much, which I thought was very foolish. But in that, my point in saying that is, how does chapter 1 of the story help us gain that perspective on work, that work itself is good and has value? And then what we haven't really talked about much in our conversation yet, which is chapter 4, which you alluded to that already, Ross. So seeing that there is actually kingdom purpose in what God has given us to do. How does that help us gain a perspective on the intrinsic value of work?
Ryan, why don't you take chapter 1 and I'll take chapter 4?
I'll take chapter 1. It's amazing to hear you share that and really inspiring. I grew up in a place, I'll put it, you can literally see a super Target from my parents' house. So I wasn't like working the land, I wouldn't say. And one of my college roommates is a corn farmer in Nebraska. And I went to visit him a couple of years ago to visit his church and was watching him on his farm. And it became clear to me, like, I have not worked a day in my life, not really. Right? He was like fixing a grain elevator. So all very good, very helpful. It's interesting to hear you speak about your experience as a farmer. Of course, because on one level, that's the original human vocation, as the Bible tells it. The first humans who are given sort of the land to cultivate. And there's some really amazing stuff here. You need to know a little bit about the stories that Israel's ancient neighbors told about the world. If you read any other ancient Near Eastern creation story, and you can pick one, Babylonian, Egyptian, Canaanite, it doesn't matter, but we could go with the Babylonian one. Humans only exist in the Babylonian creation epic because in Babylonian mythology, there are varsity gods and JV gods, and the varsity gods sit up on this mountain and they don't really do anything. And the JV gods are digging irrigation canals to work the land. And they look around and they go, this is terrible. I hate this. My back hurts. We should create something to do this for us. And that's the origin of humans in that story. That do backbreaking drudgery so that the gods don't do anything at all. If you know that, Israel's story is really incredible because God is not asking humans to do anything that he hasn't done. He works, and then he actually shares his work with creatures, but not as slaves, but as partners. And one of the astonishing things about the God of Israel is he makes this beautiful world that is life-giving and made for flourishing and has so much incredible potential. And he looks at humans and he goes, I want you to have it. And we're like, awesome, we got this for 2 pages. And then everything comes off the rails. But like that says so much about God, his generosity, his regard for his creatures. He wants to share his life and his work with them. And so when we work, we know that we are not doing anything that God doesn't also do, which is why in the book, we're trying to emphasize that we work with God, not for him. That's a different story, working for God, a worse one. And Ross made an excellent point about Jesus working. I mean, this is really important too. We're not told that much, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is he lived an ordinary human existence, just like you and I have to. And so when we go into work, we're not doing anything that God hasn't done, both in creation and in the person of Jesus.
I love that. Yeah. The intrinsic value of work is rooted in the character of God and who he is. Another way you can talk about the 4 chapters is to say what ought to be, what is, what can be, and what will be.
So good.
I love that framing because you actually need chapter 4, what will be, to start to have an imagination for what can be. And so chapter 4 to me is a grounding and a foundational part of the story because you have to know, like, what's the end goal? Meredith Kline, I think, is the Old Testament scholar who basically said, even in the beginning of the story in chapter 1, there is a recognition that there's an end goal and that humanity's work ought to take city form is part of that story. and which is really fascinating. I love talking about the city. We could do like a whole nother podcast on that, theology of the city. But if you look at Revelation 21:22, there's this new city coming down out of heaven. And I think it's described in pretty great detail. Actually, Ryan referenced it earlier in our conversation. Isaiah 65:17-25 paints this amazing picture of the New Jerusalem. And if you took the time to go through the poetic description, you would come out with things like there's meaningful work. The people are delight, it says. So imagine every person not having any mental health issues. And just all that we're just fully alive. There's no violence. There's reconciliation among people. People know God. The old live out their days. Like there's just this recognition inside humanity that goes, I want to live in that city. I think I was made for that city. And I would just suggest that if we spent time soaking ourselves in what that reality is that God really wants for us, we start to ask him, like, is there anything I can do in my work right now that might just look a little bit more like that city? At least for one person, maybe even. Maybe it's the customer that comes in next and I'm front facing because I'm the Starbucks barista. Like, how do I help them just experience a little bit of that thing that I know they want that they could not articulate? But God's painted that vision for us. And I think it also counteracts the idea that all this is just going to go away in the end. There's this movement of God to create, to want to dwell with his people in the temple. Jesus comes as a human person. It is this movement from heaven to earth, and heaven is doing the same thing at the end of the story. I just love to think in the will be, because it animates my can be in the face of what is, which is Ryan's book. And that is an incredible hope. And humanity needs hope. Like we thrive on hope. And we have the greatest hope. It's not just that we get to go to heaven and be with God. That is a great hope. It is that heaven is coming here in the greatest imaginable situation that we can't even dream up ourselves.
Well, and just in case that sounds abstract, because it's very beautiful, but it's not abstract. I mean, Ross won't plug it, so I will. Like Denver Institute is actually helping to form workers who do this kind of thing. Through their programming. I had the privilege of getting to help out a little bit with the 5280 Fellowship, which is where you've got all these workers in Denver thinking about the New Jerusalem and seeing how that might animate their possibilities for work now. And to give you just one example, I mean, Ross just articulated that vision from the prophet Isaiah where everybody has enough. Right? We live in a city where not everybody has enough, but what if God's people saw their work as one of the ways that we get closer to that vision? And there was a fellow who realized she worked for a company that did sort of food for cafeterias and office buildings, and realized that because of food safety laws, they were throwing away all that food at the end of the day, even though there was nothing wrong with it. She devised an entire system to track the temperature of it throughout the day to prove that it was still good. And all that stuff went to after school programs, right? That's Isaiah stuff. That's New Jerusalem stuff. Right. Yeah. So that idea of what will be, opening our imagination for what can be, I mean, it's really powerful and concrete.
One of the most stunning and interesting points in the book is this idea that we were all made for a place. And part of the problem most of us experience in the context of work is a crisis of place. I have no venue. This is why we love hearing Autumn talking about the farm, because that feels like a place.
Yeah, totally.
You get your hands dirty, and it's this creation. It's Genesis 1 and 2, and we can kind of imagine the concreteness of it. It's a recovery of a place. But Ross, what I hear you saying with chapter 4 of the new heaven and the new earth, the heavenly city coming down, is that it is an ultimate recovery of place. So then we can now think of our own work context, even though it is often disembodied and it's not a farm, but it feels less tangible.
Mm-hmm.
But we can begin to imagine it as being a place. There's something to cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that God maybe could have me here and empower me to do, to bring newness and shalom. And I can do that here. Through the Spirit, my workplace can be a real place again. Can you unpack some of that more? I just thought to me, that really struck me.
I love the wordplay of workplace and this new place that's coming down. And it's, some of us have a really defined workplace. Ryan's at Denver Seminary. It's a place. It's a physical place. It's got people. Some of us are on screens all day, which is a sort of a disembodied place. There's a part of me that laments that, part of me that celebrates it because you're getting to connect with people you wouldn't have connected with probably, or you get to be in a kind of place. But I think no matter if it's a virtual place or if it's a actual workplace you're going to, you need an imagination about place. Like God did not design human beings without place. When we moved from Indiana to Denver, I was more aware than ever that we were uprooting from a place. And that's hard. Mm-hmm. We're different and the place is different. And now we're rerouting, like we're trying to put new roots in a place. And that's also hard work. And I think if you just translate those concepts to work, what you're really looking for in a place, in my opinion, is there's a connection between you and God, you and the people, and you and the thing you're doing. And you're looking for ways that you can bring into a little bit more tangible reality that future ultimate place. So on a Zoom call, it might be like, how can I just get to know these people a little bit better? Because that'll connect us more. If you're, in a metal fabrication place, where did these materials come from? Do I recognize that these actually came from some place like that God gave, and we're going to do something with it together here, this group of people, and create something good and better for the world that's going to contribute to people actually flourishing in some way? I just think it's worth taking the time to reflect on all those things. So that might be my answer to your question, Dave, is can we reflect enough on this idea of place and how we attach our work to it, rather than just showing up and clocking in and clocking out and doing a task? That's not very inspiring. But I think we have some real things to hang on to from the story of work in Scripture that can bring much more of a sense of contentment and fulfillment in the things we're doing every day.
Yeah, I would only add that this is where chapter 4 of that grand narrative is really helpful, actually, because one of the more audacious claims I think that the New Testament makes is that believers are ambassadors of the kingdom of God. That's a really rich metaphor. I wonder how hard we've thought about that ambassadors are emissaries who come from one domain to another, but they also come with embassies. And the interesting thing about embassies is that even though they are physically in another nation, they are the domain of the original nation from which the ambassador is sent. So, if you end up in trouble in a foreign country, you can go to the American embassy, and that's U.S. soil. That's a very interesting way to think about work, because if you're an ambassador, that means that your place, whatever you've been given to cultivate, that's New Jerusalem's soil, right? So I have folks in my church, a couple, one administrator and a teacher in DPS. DPS, I think is fair to say, is not the kingdom of God, but her classroom can be. That can be an embassy. So when kids come into that classroom, they're in the New Jerusalem, right? That's New Jerusalem territory. It's no matter what's happening on elsewhere, or my buddy who works in tech. Is this big tech company going to serve the purposes of the kingdom? I suspect not, ultimately. But can his team be an outpost of the New Jerusalem? Absolutely it can, right? So that's another way where like that eschatology, that Christian vision, it's not just abstract, it's not inert. It actually energizes and activates the church's mission here, that agents of the new creation bring some of that turf with them. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's why places matter.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. We're working our way to the end here, but before we conclude, Ross, I wanted to come back to something that we left hanging earlier in the conversation. You had started to answer a question and then said we should come back to that. So remind me what that was. What did you have in mind that we should come back to?
Yeah, we were talking about this 4-chapter story of the gospel, and one of the things I think helps us understand and grow our imagination for what the good news really is to recognize in chapter 2 what were the far-reaching implications of humanity's decision to say, I'm going to do it my way. Mm. And in the book, we say there were five things that were really broken or lost that need to be reconciled or recovered in what God's doing in chapter 3 and ultimately chapter 4. So I'll ask Ryan to help us with those 5. What were those 5 things, Ryan?
Yeah, we just suggested in the book that sin is not just a breach of the relationship between God and humans, although that is what it is most fundamentally. But as a result of that breach, that broken relationship, there are 4 other dimensions that have become profoundly broken. So we say that there's alienation between us and our true selves. There's a psychological brokenness. This is why Adam and Eve experienced toxic emotions like shame and fear and embarrassment. There's been a breach in the relationship between us and other people, a social dimension of sin. Adam and Eve turn on each other immediately, and then the rest of the story of their family line is of violence erupting between people. We argued that sin corrupts systems. So all these structures that God gives us to flourish, like work, actually have become twisted, but also the family and the government and things like this. Although I think our government is perfect. And then
we'll have you back on to talk about that.
And then the last one of those 5 is the ecological estrangement, we call it. That the relationship between humans and the earth is actually disrupted. And you get this in Genesis 3 where we're told that they're going to work the land, but now it's going to be difficult. The land won't yield its fruit. And humans were intended to sort of steward creation. And that's another thing that's gone badly wrong because of sin.
Well, thank you both for the work that you do. Thank you to Ross and Ryan for spending time on the podcast with us today. Dave, I'm glad that you are here also.
Thanks for having me.
We will link to, that's what Dave usually says. Thanks for having me. So, we'll just work that in. Yes, so glad you're here with us, Dave. We'll link to the book that we talked about today, Faithful Work. And then we also mentioned that, Ryan, you have another book that is coming out soon. So what's the title of that book?
The book is called Worth Doing is the title, and the subtitle is Fallenness, Finitude, and Work in the Real World. It comes out in November.
All right. So I think you had said it is or will be very shortly available for pre-order. So we can point people towards that resource as well. And then you can look up, I think most of our people at Fellowship are familiar with the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, but we'll direct you to their webpage as well. So if you want to become more familiar with what it is that Denver Institute does on a day-to-day basis here in our city, encouraging people in their daily work, then you can also check that out. But thank you all. This has been great. And to those of you listening, we love hearing from you. If you have questions based on what you heard in our discussion today or suggestions about what you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast in the future, you can send all of that to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam England for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.